Hi students! In this video we are going to do Zoom lesson number 2, which is how to mute and unmute yourself and how to ask a question during a Zoom meeting. Your learning targets are as follows. I can turn my video camera off and on, I can mute and unmute myself in a Zoom meeting, and I can ask a question in the chat box. The vocabulary we're going to focus on in this video: mute, unmute, chat box, space bar. So the first thing you'll need to do is log into your Zoom meeting. To do that, you go to your Google Classroom, google.classroom.com, and click on the link that your teacher has posted. One of the great things about Zoom is that it gives us a chance to see each other face to face, even when we can't be in the same room. We want to see you during class. What you see on the screen before you is a picture of what is at the bottom of your screen when you're on Zoom. When the stop video icon looks like it does on this screen, that means the teacher can see you. When the icon looks like this with a red line through it and below it says Start Video, the teacher cannot see you. So let's take a moment to think about that red line. What does that red line through a picture mean? Let's look at the pictures here on the screen. There is an ear with a red line through it. That means you cannot hear. Our middle picture, there is a person speaking and a red circle with a red line through it. That means the person cannot speak. And on the right, where it says Start Video and there's a line through it, that means the video is not going, so the teacher cannot see you. So now let's talk about one of our new vocabulary words for today. Here we have a picture of a girl who has 2 red lines over her mouth. Thinking about the pictures we just looked at, what do you think these 2 red lines mean? These 2 red lines mean she cannot speak. So using this background knowledge about red lines and the girl who cannot speak, let's look at this question. What does mute mean? A person who is mute cannot what? Speak. A person who is mute cannot speak. Now, during a Zoom class, it is important to stay muted. So when you look at the icons on the bottom of your screen in Zoom, you will see this one, which is a microphone with a red line through it. That means you are muted. That means you cannot speak. Well, you can speak, but nobody in the classroom can hear you. Why do you think this is important? Well, there are several reasons why this is important. The first one could be a ringing phone. If you have a phone ringing in your home and you are not muted, everybody in the classroom will be able to hear the phone ringing. Maybe you have small children living in your home, and sometimes those small children get cranky. If those children are cranky and they start to cry, if you are not muted, everyone in the Zoom class will be able to hear them crying. Sometimes people have pets. Sometimes those pets make noise. If you are not muted during your Zoom meeting, everyone in the class will be able to hear your pet making noise. And sometimes there's just other people talking in the background. Most of us don't live by ourselves, and usually there's conversations or people watching TV in the background. All of this makes a big difference when you're in a Zoom meeting. All of this background noise makes it very difficult to hear when you are in a Zoom meeting. All right, so now let's take a moment to think about the prefix un. What does the prefix un mean? In English, we use the prefix un at the beginning of the word to mean not or to mean the opposite of. Can you think of some words that begin with un? I can think of 3 words that begin with the prefix un. Unfriendly means not friendly or the opposite of friendly. Unemployed means not working or the opposite of employed. And unhappy means not happy or the opposite of happy. So let's break it down a little bit. We have our prefix un. Think about, what does un mean again? Not or the opposite of. Next, we need to consider the word mute. What does it mean to be mute again? It means you cannot speak. So what does it mean to unmute something? Well, mute is cannot speak, and un is the opposite of. So the opposite of somebody who cannot speak is somebody who speaks. Mute, cannot speak. Unmute, someone who speaks. So now let's look at these icons. When you see the red line, that means you are mute. That means no one can hear you when you speak. When we look at the right and we see the icon of the microphone with no line, that means when you speak, people can hear you. It also means that if there is noise in the background of your room, the people in your classroom can hear that noise. So take a moment to practice. Here we have a picture of what a Zoom screen might look like, and you can see the mute and unmute option down in the bottom. It should always have that line through it unless the teacher calls your name. When the teacher calls your name, click on the microphone and you should be able to speak. After you are done speaking, whether you've answered a teacher's question or are asking a question, be sure to click that again. You want that red line there because that means nobody can hear any background noise. So now let's talk about how to ask a question during a Zoom meeting. Zoom actually gives you 2 ways that you can unmute yourself to ask a question. You can click on the microphone using a mouse, or you can hold down the space bar on your keyboard if you are using a computer or a laptop. You can also ask a question by writing the question in the chat box. So again, let's take a look at what the bottom of your screen looks like in a Zoom meeting. When you focus on that red arrow for number 5, you will see an icon that says chat, and it looks like there's a little cloud above it. That is the icon for the chat box. Click on the chat box. Once you do that, the chat box will pop up. You'll see where it says type message here. Click on that and type your question. You will also notice up at the top where it says to everyone. This means that everybody who is in that meeting will be able to see and respond to that question, not just your teacher. All right, so let's take a moment to go through some vocabulary review. What does it mute mean? Mute means you cannot speak. What does unmute mean? Unmute means that you can speak and people in the Google Classroom can hear you. What does chat box mean? The chat box is the way to ask a question by typing it out, so you don't have to mute or unmute yourself. You can just type out the question in the chat box. And what is the space bar? The space bar is the other way that Zoom allows you to unmute yourself. Look at the following pictures. Which picture shows that the teacher cannot hear me? Picture 1 or picture 2? Picture 1 shows that the teacher cannot hear you. What should you do if you have a question? 1. Click on unmute and start talking. Or 2. Raise my hand and wait for the teacher to ask me to unmute. The correct answer is 2. Just like in the classroom, you would raise your hand and wait for the teacher to call on you. You should do the same in Zoom. Raise your hand and the teacher will say your name and ask you to unmute. What other ways can I ask the teacher a question? Number 1, type a question in the chat box. Or number 2, send him or her a text. Both of these are okay, but the better answer is number 1, type a question in the chat box. If your teacher is leading a Zoom meeting and you have a question about something they just said, typing a question in the chat box will help you to get an answer right away. You can text your teacher the question, but if your teacher does not have their phone with them or is not looking at their phone because they're teaching, they may not get to answer that question during the class time, which can lead to more confusion. So you can ask your teacher a question either way, but the best way to do it is to type the question in the chat box. What should I do if I want to talk to a classmate while the teacher is talking? 1, unmute myself and shout out my question. Or 2, type the question in the chat box. The correct answer is number 2. Type the question in the chat box. Which of these pictures shows a space bar? Picture number 1, picture number 2, or picture number 3? Picture number 2 shows the space bar. Remember, you can use the space bar to unmute yourself during a Zoom meeting. So, I'd like you to consider 3 questions as we come to the end of the video. Can you turn the video camera off and on? Can you mute and unmute yourself in a Zoom meeting? Can you ask a question in the chat box? If yes, that's fabulous. You are now ready for the Zoom 3 video. If you are still feeling just kind of so-so or you have questions, please watch this video again and practice. If you are completely lost, just ask your teacher. Remember, we are always here to help. Thank you.